Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 19 of Diabetics for Diabetics Radio. Today, we are talking about diabetes as a series of puzzle pieces and how our current understanding of the disease and our current medical applications within our framework of the disease are incomplete and how they are not correctly ordering those puzzle pieces to create something whole. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about research, the holistic health side of things, as well as nutrition, and how those things factor in to complete the holes in our current research. So if we have not met, my name is Bowie. I have had type 1 diabetes for over 21 years, and I am sharing everything that I'm collecting in the 2 years or so that I have really started a deep dive into the research, into the holistic health side of managing diabetes. Supplements, nutrition, water, pesticides, things in your soap, plastic, everything on the margins of where our current focus is in the disease state. So if you're not already subscribed, please do. I have a TikTok channel as well. Go ahead and follow me there. I do a lot more shorter form content covering all of the things that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis from both a practical standpoint as well as theoretical and kind of ideology standpoint as well. So, like I mentioned before, we have a bit of a problem in how we are approaching the diabetic condition. So, an incomplete understanding of the systems involved in disease development. Now, if you were to ask any diabetic today what the issue with their body was, they would tell you probably that it was their pancreas. And that's because we've been conditioned to see diabetes comes about through a faulty functioning of the pancreas. So, it's like if the output from the pancreas isn't good, that's where the problem lies. But we neglect to view the pancreas in the scope of a much larger system, an endocrine system, a digestive system, nutrition, stress management, all these factors that go into the operation of not just the one organ, but the one organ in a series of organs that are interdependent. So our current medical system has isolated issues. It has reduced the logic of how things are happening to the simplest and most detached version, so that we are playing whack-a-mole with our symptoms without actually addressing the true underlying cause. And when you look at the abundance of research on diabetes, there is a lot. There is a lot on many different facets, from nutrition to disease pathology, epidemiology, all different theories and kinds of things going on. But there's no cohesion, there's no connecting dots, and a lot of that is reliant on outdated theories and applications that have since become obsolete. I'm talking about the genetic nature of type 1 diabetes. I'm talking about how nutrition plays a role in inducing inflammation. These are things that we just continue to neglect, and it shows in the efficacy of our treatments. Very few people are actually getting better. So it's hard to know the way forward when we can't agree on where we are. So I mentioned the genetic nature of diabetes. I mentioned the inflammatory nature of diabetes. When you look at the research that's coming out, looking at type 2 or looking at type 1, a lot of assumptions are made on the nature of what those what the respective diseases are. So if you're type 1, chances are you've been told at some point in your life that it's genetic and that there's nothing you can do about it. That's why, all of our eggs have been put in the stem cell and transplant basket. But when you look a little bit closer at the genetic nature and the genetic background of the development of type 1 diabetes, it is very weak and it is very incomplete. So, of the genes that have been isolated as making someone more susceptible to type 1 diabetes, only 5% of the people with those genes actually developed diabetes. 5%. So that's not strong enough for me to label it as something genetic, right? And so when you look at the research, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, when you create a model in animals to study the genetic nature of diabetes, you have to take that information that they're finding with a grain of salt, because they're basing it on something that is incomplete to begin with. The same goes for the inflammatory model for diabetes. Type 2 diabetes, we're focusing so much on manipulating the liver, whether it be glucagon-like peptide, GLP-1, low fat, high carb, only, high fat, low carb, low fat diet. It's like no one can get their story straight as to how to address the inflammation going on in diabetes. And with any advancements in, say, the genetic nature of diabetes, or any advancements in the inflammatory nature of diabetes, there is no crosstalk between the two fields. So as a type 1 diabetic, if I'm hearing research come out on the inflammatory model for type 2, I pay less attention to that because I feel like it doesn't apply to me. Meanwhile, there's a lot of very useful information going out in that I can use. Because if you look closer, like I've been mentioning with the genetic nature, type 1 is also inflammatory. It has inflammatory bases. So you can't just throw everything going on with type 2 out the window, the same way that maybe there is a genetic component to type 2, and the things that they're learning in the type 1 model can be applied and helpful in the type 2 model. So we've just kind of cemented ourselves in a stance that we were uncertain with to begin with. But because we've kind of like, okay, we're going with this, and we've just piled so much research into these two models, what was initially, well, we'll wait and see, has become something that we have not gone back to check, right? And that's an issue. So, this is the progression number one that people tend to accept for type 1 diabetics. It's in your genes. There's nothing you could do. You got the genes, your beta cells fail, and then what happens is you become inflamed, those beta cells get targeted, and then your life after that is just a series of exogenous insulin and symptom management. Same goes for type 2. Environmental factors, whether, it's a lifestyle disease, right? So lack of exercise, poor diet, poor stress management, that leads to inflammation, that leads to obesity, and that inflammation leads to beta cell failure. And then you're kind of in this chronic positive feedback loop of inflammation leading to more inflammation, leading to more inflammation, leading to more insulin resistance, leading to more insulin resistance. But this lack of clarity and this lack of crosstalk going on between the two fields of research is a problem, because what you'll see in the animal models of research is that there are drugs being used now to induce a diabetic state in mice, and those drugs are streptozotocin and aloxin. And what those are doing is they are targeting the cellular mechanisms in beta cells to induce inflammation and an inflammatory response that renders them dead, right? So it's a targeted attack on the infrastructure of the beta cells. Now, you may say, like, okay, well, after you use that, then you have a mouse that is diabetic, and you can implement the whatever the subject is that you're looking to study, whether it be, a diet, whether it be a drug, what have you, to help see if you can regenerate whatever it is that you want to do. But what that outlook neglects is the systemic effects that could be possible in inducing a human's diabetes, right? So when you give a mouse streptozotocin or aloxin, what's the effect on the liver? Is the liver at all affected? Is the greater endocrine system, the thyroid, the digestive system, are any of those things also affected to the extent where they are having the effect on, the variables that we're interested in as diabetics looking at these mice? And the answer is no. It'd be impossible, right? It's like, if you look at all of the things that go into what makes a human diabetic, there's no way that a study could ever cover all of those bases. And I mean, that's the too long didn't read version of this whole episode. Because when you give those mice streptozotocin and aloxin, you're ignoring the genetic nature of the mice, right? So you're simultaneously saying, oh, there could be a genetic nature to diabetics. But in this model that we're using, we're just kind of like blasting those cells with an immune system and neglecting any sort of marginal or outside effects that someone with those genes, could impact, right? And you may be saying to yourself, well, that's just too complicated, Bowie. How could they ever? And I'm not here to say that it's an easy job, and I can't understand why nobody's figured it out yet. But it just keeps happening, and there are no adjustments being made. So conversely to the streptozotocin and the aloxin-induced diabetes, there are also genetically manipulated mice called NOD, non-obese diabetic mice. Now, these mice are genetically engineered to have an immune system that targets their beta cells. Now, this kind of plays into the classic accepted version of type 1 diabetes, but it also completely neglects the nutritional and the stress management idea behind mineral balance, nutritional deficiencies and things like that can go into exacerbating inflammation to induce diabetes, right? So again, it's like all or nothing with one or the other, and without any regard for something other than what it is that they're saying it is. So it's a mouthful. It's, it rattles around my brain most days. But when you're reading that research, and as a member of the general public or as a researcher, how do you take what you're learning and apply it in the human system? Have we even truly acknowledged the depth and the facets, all the facets of diabetes? So I mentioned earlier that, if you ask most diabetics what they think diabetes is, oh, it's a problem with the pancreas. Yeah, but the pancreas is just a piece in a much larger system. So is it just the pancreas, or is it the endocrine system? Is it the liver? Is it the thyroid? Could it be the gonads? Is there kind of a ruling organ in that endocrine system that would lead you to believe that it has more of an influential role in the outcome of all the others? I've targeted the liver as having that effect. And then, if you knew that, you look at all the other models of diabetes that we're using to study, and nobody talks about liver health in a diabetic. No one. So, okay, endocrine system. Well, what about the digestive system? The pancreas is also incredibly influential in digestion. So we have talked about, the gut health axis, right? Where your gut microbiome is incredibly important in your health. But just in a healthy system, do we truly understand the influence that the pancreas has on the digestion of food? Most people do not. Pancreatic beta cells create two hormones: insulin, which we all know and are familiar with as diabetics, and amylin. Amylin is an incredibly influential player in the speed of digestion, satiety, or the feeling of fullness, and how quickly your food is digested in order to regulate your blood sugar. That's something most diabetics don't know, right? So again, another factor when you're looking to, at those mice that are having diabetes induced by strepsitosin, alloxin, or they're genetically modified like the NOD mice, like, are we paying attention to variables having to do with their digestion or their diet? No. The answer is no, we're not. So our current research model makes it impossible to include each of the variables involved. So, you're talking about digestion, you're talking about multiple hormones, you're talking about food intake, you're talking about, the inherent, like the genes of the person or the animal experiencing diabetes. And our scientific model demands singularity in variables and controls, right? You cannot, by our standards today, isolate one thing as the answer unless in the research you have isolated it apart from anything else to know that it does what you say it does. But the body does not work as a series of individual pieces. You cannot truly understand the function of one thing without understanding its place in something much greater. And that is where we are missing the point. So we have acquired huge volumes of information on all of these individual pieces of the diabetic system without actually addressing what those pieces do when they function together, right? And for anybody like myself on the outskirts trying to take these puzzle pieces and put them together, those same standards of, singularity of variables and controls, if you are not doing that, that discredits your research. So if I say, well, I'm paying attention to digestion, multiple hormones, and my diet, well, that's not a legitimate study because you're how could you know that it was any one thing more than the other? And it's like, well, you can't really, but when you put the three together, they synergize and create this incredible thing. So we are trying to isolate pieces in hopes of finding the thing that results in something, results in a cure or healing or, resolve symptoms or what have you. And we've lost sight of where we wanted to go. And so we have to acknowledge diabetes is a systemic issue. Pancreas has endocrine and exocrine or digestive roles. It has an intimate relationship with liver health from a hormonal standpoint and from a digestive standpoint. It compounds even greater when you think about how amylin aggregation is now a factor in the development of dementia and Alzheimer's, right? So a defective pancreas is not just for diabetics. A defective pancreas is also affecting nerve cell health and neuron health in people with Alzheimer's and dementia. And then I mentioned before seeing the liver as sort of the kingpin of the endocrine system. Iron overload has demonstrated effects in every facet of both hormones and digestive function, not just hormones themselves, but also the organs that secrete them: liver, pancreas, thyroid, pituitary, all the way up into the brain, gonads, stomach, and kidneys, right? And so you say, oh my God, Bowie, well, how do we do this, right? But healing the system requires the simultaneous use of all of our known variables. And what we're doing now does not allow for that with any degree of credibility or universal application, because it's a lot harder to regulate, and it's a lot harder to address on a uniform basis. And I've said this before, the cure for diabetes is going to look a little bit different for everyone. We all have very similar things to address, but it is not going to be, oh, here's the magic pill, take it and you're cured. That's not how this is going to go. And the big elephant in the room in all of this is the fact that cellular health and our health as a system as a whole, as a human being, is dependent upon our nutrition, the quality of our food, and our ability to handle environmental stresses. It could be toxins, it could be social aspects, that goes on infinitum. But nutrition and stress management, there are no two things that doctors know less about than nutrition and stress management. And that's to no fault of their own, really, because they're not being taught it. It's not being prioritized. It's not important to them and the system that they adhere to. So as a diabetic, looking up to these research institutions, you start to see these holes and you start to think, well, who am I supposed to turn to? But then you find, like, okay, well, who are the researchers and the doctors relying on? Well, there are pharmaceutical incentives, there are insurance incentives. So money has clouded a lot of the intentions in research and development for diabetes management. So let's design a hypothetical study here that manages all of the factors of the pancreas, right? So obviously the endocrine function, right? The hormones, insulin, glucagon, that's just kind of like your basic plus and minus in the blood sugar department. You've got exocrine function as well. You've got acinar cells that release digestive enzymes, amylin to help pace digestion, to help insulin and glucagon do their job more effectively. And then cell health in general. Do they have the raw materials, magnesium, potassium, sodium, calcium, to operate at a healthy level? Do you have the right alpha cell, beta cell balance? Because, again, a lot of diabetics are just assuming, well, I'm diabetic, my pancreas is broken. Well, not really. It's really just the beta cells. You have alpha cells. You have gamma cells. You have delta cells. It's just the beta cells you're missing. Oh, and onto that study, let's go ahead and throw in the liver function as well. So the cross-system functioning of the liver. So it is digestive, incredibly digestive. It stores fat-soluble hormones. It recycles iron. It produces bile along with, and stores it in the gallbladder to help digest fats. It detoxifies the blood, alcohol, parasites, heavy metals, everything. The liver is there to handle all of those factors, each of which plays a well-established role in affecting the function of the pancreas. So let's go ahead and throw that into the mix as well. Oh, by the way, let's also, consider the nutrition of our study subjects, right? So I mentioned the liver processing those fat hormones, or not those fat hormones, those fat soluble vitamins, and sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium affecting the function of the cells themselves. Okay, are we controlling for the mineral deficiencies or the mineral balances of our test subjects? Is the food that we're feeding them in these studies conscious of the inflammatory effects of foods that are imbalanced? Maybe, maybe not. Mostly not. Oh, but also we also, this is another factor we have to take into effect, the epigenetic inheritance of family health issues, inherited deficiencies and imbalances, right? So not only are we worried about our test subjects, but what were the nutritional states, the mineral balances, the mineral deficiencies, the life conditions of the parents and grandparents, right? We're dealing with inherited issues here, inherited imbalances. This is a lot more than just skin deep. So, what was the health of their parents? Was the health of their parents indicative of any deficiencies or imbalances, right? Because that's going to affect where resources are being pulled in our current test subjects' bodies, right? Oh, and don't forget the systemic effects, downstream positive feedback loops. So once the imbalances and deficiencies take place, how is our body compromising? What systems is it taxing to help make up for that lost territory? And once symptoms start to evolve, secondary symptoms, in the new systems being taxed to address the initial imbalances, okay, well now, we don't know where to look. Where, it's like, well, it says your magnesium's low. Well, is your magnesium low because you're iron overloaded? Well, am I going to give you magnesium, or am I going to handle your iron overload first? So you are just stuck in this crazy sticky web of infinite directions that when just looking at this page alone, it's dizzying. And how are you supposed to control for all of those factors in our current research model in a way that's going to be accepted, published, and used as an educational resource? Like, it's not going to happen. That's not how this system is working right now. So what are we supposed to do? And this is going to feel like a cliffhanger, right? Because I've just built this huge, big crescendo on kind of the issues, and I'm going to kind of leave it at this point where I don't give a ton of answers. The following episodes after this are going to dive into how I have addressed each of these steps. But the long story short version here is going to be that you need to pick one facet, the lowest hanging fruit that you can, to help start to induce some sort of balance, okay? Mineral balance. Testing for your baseline levels. Find out what your magnesium levels are. Are you high in sodium? Are you low in potassium? Are you calcified? What about your trace minerals? Are you iron overloaded? Right? And what are things that you can do through supplementing or nutrition and eating nutrient-dense food? How can you address some of those on a everyday type of thing, right? Because if you don't change your food intake is ultimately what you're being made up of. You can't really expect things to change through some pharmaceutical company if you're not changing the tools that you're building with. Become physically active. Physical fitness has always been a part of my life. This has been an easy thing for me, and I know that it is not for everyone. But lean mass and a decreased fat mass are critical for maintaining insulin sensitivity, maintaining cell health, mitochondrial health. It's very much if you don't use it, you lose it kind of thing. And it is a lot easier than people think. Walking, go for a daily walk. That is the easiest place to start. It does not take much, and it will have wide-reaching effects in your health. And then I mentioned before with the mineral balance, but you need to start eating healthier. Worry first about what you can take away. Addition through subtraction. Take away the bad first before you start, throwing, all this crazy stuff that you read about on the internet down your throat. Inflammatory oils, polyunsaturated fatty acids, vegetable oil, canola oil, safflower, sunflower, corn, soybean oils. I don't cook with them. I have nothing to do with them. They are not in the ingredients on any foods that I eat. I limit added sugar. If it's in a box, I'm not eating it. I eat plenty of fruit. That's fine. And I adjust as necessary, but, no added sugar, no enriched or fortified foods, enriched wheat flour, baked goods, cookies, pastries, pasta, none of that. Absolutely none. And those are, it's just not doing something. It's not something that you have to go out of your way to do. It's just a matter of taking the things that you're doing now and saying, I'm not going to do this anymore. And when you start to make those simple everyday decisions, things start to compound, right? So take inventory. What are some things that you are doing now that you know are not helping your inflammatory state? We've all got them, whether it be sleep quality, blue light, sun, not getting enough exercise, not getting enough sun and fresh air. Feel the feelings, right? You can be upset with yourself. You can blame your parents. You can blame your upbringing, whatever. You need to accept responsibility for where you are and start to take action, right? Identify what needs to change and then make small, sustainable changes. Celebrate your progress. And once you do that, your energy levels are going to improve. Your health is going to improve. The more curious you'll become because you'll realize that progress is possible. The more you try, the more you learn. Horizons broaden, new inputs, new facets of health explored, right? And it's just kind of this unfolding process. Like I said, I'm in the midst of it now. The next episode will be exactly what it is that I'm doing, right? How I'm taking the puzzle pieces that we've talked about today and applying them to myself in my daily life. The who, the what, the where, and the why. So, again, it may seem like I've created more problems than I've solved. Understanding the systems that we're working with is an important part for actually making progress. You have to know where you are before you can figure out where it is that you're going to go. Okay? So follow, subscribe. Like I said, I'm going to continue talking about this and give insight into what it is that I'm doing, right? So I've got some partnerships here with supplement companies for what I use to help address my personal mineral deficiencies and imbalances. Thorne Supplements, MitoLife, Ancient Bliss. I've also got my own nutrition and supplement guides that I have available in the link in the description. And I've also written a book. It's called An Ironclad Cause, talking about iron overload and its role in the development of diabetes. And it is a lot deeper than anyone knows or acknowledges. I don't know who else knows this, but if you have not heard about iron overload and diabetes, I highly recommend that you look into my book here. That'll be linked in the description as well. I talk in depth about how it's happening, what it's doing, and some very, very intimate ties to the diabetic condition that not many people talk about. So highly recommend that. But that's it for now. Okay. All of the puzzle pieces that we as diabetics need to be cognizant of. And moving forward, the next episode, we'll talk about more about what I am doing to handle these puzzle pieces. All right. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. This is episode 19 of Diabetics for Diabetics Radio. My name is Bowie Madison. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.